John Danbach of the RotoGrinders, and it's the Daily Fantasy Football Feed. Thanks so much for giving this listen and a download, and of course a subscription. If you haven't subscribed to this, maybe you just caught this on social media somewhere, make sure you do click that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever, because this is going to be a banging feed come about 90 days or so from now when we get hopefully real daily fantasy NFL to be talking about. Going to have a lot of new shows, going to be bringing back some of your favorites. We're in the planning stages of all that right now, but get excited. A lot of great things here to come on this football feed. Today, we're going to be talking with Scott Hanson here in a moment, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the NFL, maybe some ideas so they don't run into a similar situation like we saw today with Major League Baseball, and some off-season thoughts, and of course, best ball is growing leaps and bounds, and we'll give some ideas for you guys in terms of what you should be doing in terms of building those best ball lineups, and kind of some early off-season thoughts about guys that we think could pop. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. One thing, though, I wanted to address, and I don't have a daily podcast anymore, so I thought this was as good of a spot for me to address it as any, is basically what happened with us in SiriusXM. I had a few people reach out to me and said, hey, Dan, we got baseball back, we got basketball back, I'm waiting to hear you on the radio, and nothing. Where'd you guys go? And here's the story. Basically, in the middle of June, right around then, we got a call from management and basically said to us in no uncertain terms that, we appreciate everything you've done. You do a great show. Got nothing bad to say about anything that you've done. Have never had negative criticism about, you're not doing something the right way. But we just really want to terminate your contract. And they were absolutely within their right to do that. So it's not like they did something wrong. Like, they can do that. But with really no warning and no explanation, it's a pretty hard way to kind of be taken off the air, especially as we've grinded like 6 years with them. So as somebody who's kind of been at the heart of it from the beginning until the end, it shook me for a while. And I didn't address this for a while because I didn't think it was really necessary. We are at our best when we have daily sports. We've got DFS cranking full steam, and we're helping people make money. We're on right before lock. Like, that is why I think that show worked so well for SiriusXM. It put authentic voices in the most important time of lineup building on a huge, fantasy platform. I mean, the day I started at RotoGrinders, one of my goals was to get that show, which we soon had a few years after. And the reason for it was because I knew people would listen. I knew there were people driving around wanting to make lineups, not being able to necessarily do the work themselves. And if there was big news to be had, they had an easy platform to get that news and make changes accordingly. And I think we succeeded. I think we did an awesome show through our entire time there. And, I think it's going to be a huge gap that they have to fill because, the one thing RotoGrinders is known for, it's daily fantasy. And the people who are talking about it are the same people who are in the trenches with you night in and night out. That was the one prerequisite I had of anybody who was doing shows and still have to this day is if you're doing shows, you got to be playing because you not necessarily putting your money where your mouth is, but what's going to be the motivation for doing the research if you are not out there actually playing the games? And, for me personally, somebody who's really busy and I don't play as much as I used to, I made it a fact to be playing every night that I did a radio show because what I spoke about and what Beer spoke about and what Crane and what STL Cardinals and Big T and Dean and all the hosts that we had over the years, the one thing that I could always say is, we were, I felt, the most knowledgeable people on the station talking about DFS, and especially right before lock, there wasn't a better time for it. So unfortunately, our time is up, and there's nothing we can do about it, and fully thank everybody over there who gave us that platform to do what I love more than anything. I mean, radio is my background. That's what I started. That's where my real passion has always been. And it's going to be tough to not necessarily have that. But the good news for all of you out there who are like, man, now what am I going to do? Well, make sure you download that RotoGrinders app. Now, it's a feature we've had for a while, so this is nothing new, but you can stream audio only from the RG app. And basically, if you have a car that has XM radio, then you've probably got a car that's got Bluetooth, and you can play it right through your speakers. So a lot of the same stuff that we did on the SiriusXM show, we're doing every single night on Grinders Live. We're doing on crunch time right before lock. And again, you're talking about the site that I think is delivered the goods longer than anybody out there. And when you talk about authenticity and the voices, I don't think it gets any better than RotoGrinders. So that's my recommendation for you if you're looking for that outlet. Is make sure you download that app, because we got content for you pretty much 7 days a week from a media perspective, and that's an easy way to get it. But I thought I would shed some light on that, and again, no ill will. Was I surprised? Absolutely. Was I disappointed? Absolutely. Do I wish we were still doing shows on there? Absolutely. Would I immediately go back and do shows again if asked? Absolutely. But I thought you, as people who are part of our community, people who have listened, to the show and have expectations of the show, you should know kind of what took place, and there you have it. So, all right, well, enough of that housekeeping. Let's get to the podcast for today. NFL season, still a lot of question marks around it, but excited for this conversation with Scott Hanson, Mr. E. Scott, and talking some NFL, getting some best ball for you. That's coming up now. All right, excited for this. We got Scott Hanson. You know him as Escot4, one of the best daily fantasy football players, I think, in the history of the industry. Certainly the results back that up. Multi-million-dollar winners, won several live finals, and seemingly every year at least has a shot at one of those big live finals for the NFL. And a guy that we've been lucky enough at RotoGrinders who's been a part of the Ownership Report, one of my favorite shows that Scott has done with Chris Jimino on Saturdays for, I think, like the last 3 or 4 years or so. And he hit me up and said, Dan, I want to talk some NFL. And I'm like, Scott, you want to talk NFL? I am in for this. And let's jump into it. Scott Hanson, welcome to the show, man. How's life treating you? I know crazy 2020 going on right now.
Yeah, pretty crazy, but, we're doing well here. And, I'm looking forward to hopefully having sports. And, it looks like NBA is going pretty well. It looks like they're off to a good start, and hopefully NFL will be able to take some lessons. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Oh, okay.
You sound great.
All right. How are you doing, Dan?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Yeah, and certainly, one of the things that we're going to talk about here, we're going to get some best ball, we're going to get some NFL offseason analysis, but, you kind of were alluding to it here in that, the NFL certainly looks like it's still a question mark on what's going to happen this year, where we've got the NBA in the bubble. We've got Major League Baseball with today having this outbreak for the Marlins, which, some people are wondering, does it put the season in jeopardy? And, you tweeted out something earlier today about a bubble with the NFL. And I almost replied to you, and I don't know why I didn't. But when you said I want to, do a show and kind of talk about this a little bit, I was like, heck yeah, I want to talk about this because I don't know how it works. So, Scott, it sounds like you've thought this through a little bit and feel like you might have an idea on how the NFL can actually do this in a way that can actually work, so we don't run into the same situation we just saw with the Marlins, where you get a big spread on a team. Because let's face it, NFL feels like if there's ever a sport where you can have a really quick spread, either in a locker room or on the field, it's in the NFL.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I have an idea. It's not 100% thought out, of course, and I mean, I don't have the financials or anything like that as far as how much this would cost, and I'm sure it would be a big cost to the teams, but a much bigger cost is losing the entire season. So, my idea is essentially having a bubble for each region, just a north, south, east, west. You've got the NFC West and AFC West in the same bubble, and so on. So, if you were to have that, then the bubbles would be a similar size to the NBA bubble. I feel like trying to get the entire 32-team league into one bubble might not be feasible. If it is, that's probably ideal because then there's no travel. Yeah. But, you'd have to have that. You'd also likely have to have some sort of a bubble for free agents and some other players who are kind of on the radar, at least, of possibly being able to fill in. And with that, I think that you'd be able to make things work. So to start off, you've got the 80 teams or the 80 players per team.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to file it down. So as you go along, if you're only letting players in who have negative tests, similar to the way the NBA is doing it, then I think that it's possible to work. You just have to have a really big infrastructure in each place, and you have to have enough fields for practice. You have to have enough weight room facilities. So I don't have the specifics as far as, idea for actual locations to use, but I would think that there are some locations that could potentially work. And the biggest effect is that if you do this, you have no travel for divisional games, and you have no travel for regional games of the opposing conference. So like AFC West, NFC West games. And essentially that's going to make it so you probably only travel for around 3 or 4 road games per team. Some might even be less. And then you're only traveling from one bubble situation to another.
Okay, so your take is 4 bubbles instead of 1, which I think is way more doable, because I just don't see how they could do what the NBA is doing with the vast number of players each team has. It's just
right.
Legitimately impossible unless they wanted to literally take up all the resorts on Disney themselves. And let's face it, the NBA already has that in lockdown. So that's not happening.
And where do you have enough practice fields for teams to even get practice in throughout the week?
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, Disney probably could figure it out, because they, that worldwide of sports they've got more marshland than you would believe. But you're right. Like there's so many things that come into it, but catering to, say, 8 teams instead of the full allotment seems a lot more reasonable. I think the biggest question mark we have here, and this is the thing that I don't think the league wants to do, is you'd basically be succumbing to, like, okay, we're going to have no fans. And I think most teams are okay with that. Like, there was some talk that you're going to have like 20% fans, but at the end of the day, even if you get like 20% fans, what do you really even get out of that? I mean, maybe you get some parking revenue, some ticket revenue, but it's so marginal in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, especially compared to the risk.
Yeah, especially compared to the risk. And let's face it, I don't think the risk is on the players per se, being an outdoor venue, as much as it's just bad public policy to be having a bunch of people come together to watch a football game. Like, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But yeah, I think the biggest question we need to ask ourselves is, like, what sort of place could handle something like this? The first thing that kind of came to mind was, maybe an area where you've got multiple colleges out there. But then the flip side of that is, well, what about the colleges themselves? They might still be having school. They might still be having football. And then the next question is, like, are they ready to play these games, like, in high school facilities? Like, I mean, you can put 100-yard field anywhere. I just have a hard time seeing that they're going to play, legitimate professional football games and anything that is not a full-size stadium. And I just don't know that we could run this many games in maybe one full-size stadium. And again, this is just kind of just my first initial thoughts, but I'm sure they can be debunked pretty easily. What's your thinking on this? And on top of that, man, it's a long time. You've got the NBA in the bubble for 2 months here. Do we think NFL players are ready to stay in a bubble from training camp potentially through the end of December? That's a long time, man. Like, I agree with you. I love it. But
it's a very long time.
Is it practical? Like, do we think the union is going to sign off on something like this?
I think the union would. I think that it's something that they wouldn't exactly be looking forward to from an experience standpoint, but I think they would love to see that the league has their back and that they're prioritizing safety first, and that's something that I think that a lot of professional athletes right now are nervous that, like, should we even trust these people? Do they have our best interests in mind? Or are they putting money first? And I think if they're able to delay things a little bit, feel things out, and look for possible venues, I mean, one of the first ones that comes to mind to me is the Oregon Ducks facility, how they have just this massive facility that could accommodate something like this potentially. And I believe they have at least 2 full-sized fields. And, I mean, you could run 2 NFL games at the same time on those 2 fields on a Sunday, and still have the games even at the normal times. If you have a couple of other schools across the country that are like that, I mean, I really don't anticipate college football working out because these kids aren't being paid. I don't see how they're going to be able to distance themselves. I don't see how they're going to be able to monitor on the same level for coronavirus and be able to keep everyone safe with, efficient testing and having the funding for all of that. It just doesn't seem practical for college football, except for maybe a few of the biggest schools. But who are they going to play then? I mean, Are you going to have some schools playing and some not? How is this going to work? So
yeah, I mean, as somebody who grinds DFS for both, I would love to see college punt until the spring. And even if you have the top players not play, at least it's, maybe NFL in the fall and then college football in the spring. Like, that would just be wonderful for my workload. That's a selfish, desire, of course. But it's also like, I mean, college is just a different animal itself because they're so reliant on the revenue to drive not just their football program, but everything that they do. Like, their entire sports is pretty much subsidized by their football. And it's not just the big schools. It's like when Western Michigan gets their ass kicked by Michigan, they get $1.5 million check that helps them be able to run women's soccer and the wrestling team and the field hockey team and the golf team and all this other stuff. I mean, it's a lot of money for a university of that.
Yeah, they literally refurbish their own asses after they've been kicked.
Exactly. Yes. So I think it's a little bit of it's a different animal. And I think it's a really interesting thing to see because you're right. It's almost weighing like how much risk do we put on these kids and how much risk is there really on them in terms of, yes, contracting the virus is bad. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of long-term issues with it. Obviously, in the short term, very few people from the ages of 18 to 22 are having, I don't want to say even severe symptoms, but certainly very few are seeing the hospital. Can it happen? Absolutely, it can happen. And I think that's like the one thing that would derail any NBA, MLB, or certainly NFL is if there's somebody who contracts the virus and it does more than any athlete has happened to them to this point. Because we've known guys like Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Kevin Durant, many baseball players now are Juan Soto, golfers have turned positive. There hasn't been a single story about one of these players who have had, horrible symptoms that have potentially put them in the hospital. And I think when that happens, that can change the narrative, I think, a little bit more and maybe make the players, a little bit more concerned than I think a lot of them are currently.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Spencer Dinwiddie may have had a little more issues than a lot of the players, but definitely, I agree with your point. And but the problem with NFL is if you get one, say, running back who carries the ball 20 times a game testing positive, or taking a test on Friday, you get the results on Saturday and it says negative, but what does he do between Friday and the game on Sunday? Say he ends up positive and he ends up being touched, tackled by, most of the players on the opposing defense, and he's right next to all the players on the sideline all game. I mean, this is a situation where one person could spread it to, potentially half of each team. And if you knock out half of a team, essentially Avengers style, you don't know which players exactly are going to get it. And it could be, a star quarterback. It could be, someone who's one of the faces of the league. And then it could be an entire team's, core of skill players. Who knows who would end up testing positive. But if that happens, then they're going to miss games, and it might even lead to more than that. It might be a situation where they're still positive, for a game 2 weeks later, and all of a sudden maybe that happens, around the league somewhere else too, and you might have multiple teams that are just being gutted, at least for portions of the season. And what exactly are they going to trot out as far as a team? I mean, who's to say that the coaches aren't going to get it, and you have your entire coaching staff and half your players out for one game? You're going to have like replacement coaches and, basically replacement players.
And it's probably not even going to be one game. It's probably going to be two games, because it was like 14 days that you're looking at. And here's the kind of the troublesome part about it is we see what happened to the Marlins. Baseball is a game which is nowhere near as physical as the NFL. You don't have that much touching. Yeah, you got people together like in a dugout and in the locker room a little bit. But even in that capacity, if you masked up and you're not in too close, proximity to each other, you can play the game itself pretty easily. NFL, it's just not possible. And we saw in MLB, speculation is like there may be like 14 players and coaches there with the Marlins who are positive. Well, Major League Baseball, the minor leagues go deep. And yeah, there's a difference between a AAA player and a major league player, but I don't want to say it's a marginal difference, but there's plenty of those guys who've played AAA baseball who have had a cup of coffee or a half a season or so as a big league player. I don't think anybody would look at them and scoff and be like, oh,
they're not going to embarrass themselves.
Exactly. They're not going to embarrass themselves or put anybody at risk. Where the NFL on the flip side, we see these preseason games and we just laugh at how bad they are. Think about it, like how bad these third and fourth quarters are the NFL. And we kid ourselves and be like, 95% of these guys or 90% of these guys don't even make it on the team. And we can see why. They're just not the level of athlete that it takes to be a professional football player. And the rosters aren't that big in the NFL, and I don't think the owners are necessarily going to allow them to expand them. And B, I just don't know that they're able to play at the level that is required. And and I think that's kind of like the biggest issue here with maybe even NFL to MLB, where I think MLB can weather it because you can play those guys for 2 weeks. Have these, hopefully anybody who gets COVID can get by it, and then they come back. And the NFL, if you're down without, your entire offensive line for 2 weeks, and you've got Tom Brady at quarterback, you're best off probably not playing him those 2 weeks, because it's not going to be pretty, the outcome. And it's impossible to be competitive. It'd be impossible.
Right. And when you talk about offensive line, I mean, just think about offensive and defensive lines, think about how they line up. If anyone on the offensive and defensive line has it, it's going to be transferred because, they're breathing heavily. They're sweating, like fluids. They're getting there. And when you have an offensive line having players missing from it, you see major holes at the NFL level. It's a very shallow position across the league. And that's one of the reasons that you see the play deteriorate so much in the preseason is, you even saw it with like the XFL and you don't get anywhere near the same level of play. And the other position that's like that to a great degree is the quarterback position. Mm-hmm. That's another position where when you lose the starter, it can be a very big drop-off for a lot of teams. And if a team does lose that, then they're a very, very different team for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, no question about it. And, I think the biggest thing that the NFL has to do, I talked about this with a bunch of RG guys as well, and this is where Major League Baseball literally blew it, by the way, is they somehow thought that having a lag in 2 days between getting a test and getting the results was an appropriate response, which is completely ridiculous. I'm not going to act like I'm the most knowledgeable person in the world of COVID testing because I'm not. But there has to be some sort of rapid tests where you can get results within a handful of hours. Maybe it's even like 12 hours, but you can't be sending your results off to Utah and then waiting 2 days like apparently Major League Baseball may have been doing. Like, that is just absolutely piss poor policy. And maybe that speaks to the leadership there. And, we've seen a lot more responsibility with the NBA, and I think it's a little bit easier on them to have that because they built this bubble. But, if the NFL wants to say, like, listen, we love Scott. Okay, we love Scott. He's a smart guy. He's won a lot of money, but we can't do a bubble. At the very least, they've got to have I don't want to say instantaneous, but they have to have the ability to get these test results way faster. And even currently, I think the agreed upon was when it falls below 3%, then they're going to start testing people every other day instead of every day. And I don't even like that because I think, as we've seen, especially with this sport, it's only going to take one or two guys who lag a day because you're testing every other day to get in there and then infect a number of players on the team. And it's going to spread like wildfire with the NFL, like we talked about.
If you're not going to have a bubble situation, you need more frequent testing, and you absolutely can't have more games than days with tests. How does that make sense? And these guys are going home to their families at night a lot of the time. So you could easily pass it to your entire family as a player, and that just
or your family passes it to the player, because even the player can be responsible and say, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to practice. I'm going home. That doesn't mean the kid's not going to school. It doesn't mean your wife's not going to the store. People are still living their lives and can still contract it. And just to say the player is doing the right things doesn't mean his family is not, or even if they are, doesn't mean they can't get it anyway.
Right. So, when it comes down to it for me, I really think that the NFL is a little bit late on some of their policies and doesn't have anything firm in place. And I think they need to delay things a little. I really don't think they should be having players report in a few days. Yeah. I think they kind of need to take a step back and look at how the MLB has failed so far. I'm not saying that the MLB can't get it on track. I think it's possible, but they need to attack it. This isn't something to just be like, okay, well, we're going to do this to appease the fans and the players so that they'll agree to play, and then let's go. Let's just make sure we get out there. That's the most important thing. No, it's you handle the safety issue first.
Yeah, and the thing about the NFL, even more so than MLB, is they don't really have to worry about weather. You know, they can play into January, they can play into
Right.
February, they can play into March if they wanted to. I mean, football, some people have been saying, well, Dan, they don't want to be playing these regular season games, and they do it all the time. You know what?
Yeah.
Well, and that's
XFL.
in that excuse for college, and that's where, like, I think college, if anything, I talked about punting to the spring. I'd love to see it, but I think the realistic option for them is just to kind of like hold off a little bit. Like, you have an entire month
Yeah.
of December where you've got crappy bowl games that nobody watches anyway. Like, just take a break. Like, don't be in a hurry. And I think the same thing applies to the NFL, where there's going to be a ton of testing. There's going to be a ton of issues that come up early. And if things aren't ready to go, then don't go, because let's face it, the television networks, the highest rated shows of the year are football games. So if they want to play in the middle of freaking summer, they'll broadcast the games because people are going to watch. And I just think that, like, they can dictate when their games are being played, where a sport like Major League Baseball does have weather issues. Sport like NBA, for example, like, if they don't get it done by a certain date, it's going to bleed into the next year. So I don't think NFL has those issues, and I think they need to be flexible on that front.
Being a parent can be really challenging. It's normal to feel uncertain about whether you're doing the right things to raise healthy and happy children. That's why Child and Family Resource Network focuses on connecting pregnant parents and those with kids under the age of 5 with free support services to help them build confidence in their parenting journey. Everyone deserves to have someone they can turn to for support with parenting. Visit childandfamilyresourcenetwork.org today.
All right, well, I think we covered that pretty well, Scott. Let's kind of get into some offseason stuff with the NFL. And one of the games that has really emerged, and one of the things I actually love to do as a lead up to the football season, is best ball, because you get the best of drafting, which we all love, and none of the in-season minute management, which we all hate about DFS. And, of course, one of our favorite apps, Draft, dissolved, this past season. But the makers of Draft came out with Underdog Fantasy, and they rolled out a pretty massive best ball mania, they're calling it. $1 million in prizes, $200K going to first place. So not even too ridiculous on the top heavy payout nature, which I know I certainly like. And I've fallen in love with this stuff because it's the best kind of time waster you can have. You're at a kid's practice, if you're just lazing around and you got nothing to do, firing up some best balls doesn't get much better than that. And have you had a chance to check out the app? Have you had a chance to do much best ball here this off season? Because it's something that I'm completely into, totally.
Yeah, I've definitely checked out the app, and I do really like the structure of this tournament, and the roster construction, the scoring, all of that. I think it's really good. I haven't actually done any best ball teams yet because, so maybe unlike the NFL itself, I like to do my planning before I do any sort of action.
Sure.
And I'm like 24 teams through my projections. I got 8 to go, and once I finish those, I'll start drafting a little bit. But I kind of just like to get that out of the way first. And there are a couple of dates that are important coming up where I don't really want to draft some teams where we might find out that the player opts out.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's weird because, like, there's a lot of, like, talk about, is it better to draft early when there's less information? You can speculate on things and get guys at a better draft point. Like, for example, like Antonio Brown, like, obviously
right.
If he would get signed in the next month, he's going to go way higher than he is right now. So you can speculate on that. And if you think he is, you're getting a good value on him, where if you don't think he is, then, waiting doesn't really put you at much of an advantage, because basically, the closer you get to the season, the less likely people are going to draft him. So
right.
there's two sides to that coin.
Definitely.
And injuries is the other thing. Now, we don't have preseason football, but guys get hurt in training camp all the time. And that can really, really swing, the value of certain players. And I'm probably leaning towards that you probably have a little bit greater advantage the later you wait, but I'm not completely sold on it. And let's face it, if I draft 150 of these teams, I got a lot of drafts to do between now and the start of the season. So I'll have plenty of exposure to drafts early on. So you said you got like all but 8 teams done. So let me know what are the 8 teams you haven't done, so I don't ask you about players from those squads.
I mean, you can still ask me, but
okay.
The 8 teams I haven't done are starting with the New York Jets in alphabetical order. So, anything after the N for as far as the city. I have gotten in the Giants, actually. I've gotten in like the Saints and the Patriots. So I've got everything before them. And
I love it.
So, yeah.
Alphabetical. You don't even go by divisions or conferences. It's all alphabetical. Okay.
How I have it set up on the spreadsheet. So, yeah.
But, all right. Well, I want to throw a couple names out there. I think this is the best way to approach it. And from a strategy standpoint, we've done some shows. We're going to do more on that. But, crazy offseason. I want to know what you think of Cam Newton, because he's a guy who I've probably drafted maybe 10 teams so far. I haven't yet to get a Cam team, and I don't know if I like that. He's going to New England.
Right.
He's on this 1-year deal, and he's a guy that the range of outcomes could be a backup to, dare I say, like MVP. That's probably a really high range.
That happen.
I don't see that happening, especially with the rest of the offense around him. But he's certainly an impact player, or could be.
Yes.
What's your take on Cam and certainly that Patriots team? Because I think they're super intriguing, having no Tom Brady around for the first time in, it seems like, 20 years.
Yeah, I do like Cam a decent amount, especially for best ball, because his style of play lends itself to blow up games. He has those multiple rushing touchdown games, or those games where he breaks off a 40-yard run, or they have like a nice play action deep ball or something like that. So he has a style that does tend to blow up from time to time, and I do think that they're going to use him a decent amount around the goal line. So I would expect a nice amount of rushing touchdowns from New England. However, as far as the team outlook, while I do see them as a playoff team, I see them being a very low scoring and low points given up type of team. I think that they're going to use sort of a ball control style. They're going to let their defense try to win things for them, because they still have a very good secondary. And I think that because of having Cam, that's going to bolster the entire rushing attack. There's one thing that Cam does is he helps open things up a little bit for his running backs to get a little bit more in terms of yards per carry than they otherwise would, because of the threat of him on like a read option type of play, or even just when it comes to the threat of him scrambling, everything that comes along with having a running back or a quarterback as mobile as Cam sort of helps the team with ball control.
Yeah, and it kind of fits, like you say, what they are going to want to do, because they don't have like a ton of just incredible offensive skill players. I mean, Sony
Not
Michel
at all.
is their, I guess, top running back, and the dude's a complete and utter plotter. They got N'Keal Harry, who caught like 4 passes last year. Julian Edelman, I think, is a nice player, but I also think he's a guy who just, was so in tune with Tom Brady that
right.
you can't necessarily expect that to translate with a new quarterback.
Yeah, and I mean,
no tight ends.
Edelman.
Like I don't get it. Like I agree completely with what you're saying, and I just think like Cam feels like a guy who could just almost do everything that needs to be done to get them W's, but maybe not put up the gaudiest numbers.
Right. I think he would be the type of quarterback that, whether in best ball or DFS, you may not want to stack as much, because he doesn't really have the high-end receiving option. I mean, Julian Edelman's yards per target is like below league average for a wide receiver these days. So he's not even as efficient as he used to be, even with Brady. And I don't see him having that same connection with Cam. I think he's going to be solid, but I don't think he's going to be anything special. And Edelman in particular is not a best ball type player. He has a lot lower of a ceiling and a high floor, which is really not what you need.
Yeah, no, completely. And, the one thing Cam has going for him too, and I'm, this is straight narrative street, but I mean, he's been written off. I mean, the dude signed a contract for next to nothing to play for New England. And I think he did that knowing that, like, his career's kind of on the line. Like, if he has a big season, he's going to go get paid and make a lot of money playing somewhere else. If he shows up and looks like the player we saw last year, his career could pretty much be over, and I think from what I've seen, social media and whatnot, the dude realizes that. He's putting in time. He looks ridiculously fit right now. And we know that, like, he's had injuries that have set him back. So whether he can overcome them over the course of a season, we'll see. But, certainly I think the narrative is there for him to have him bounce back.
Right. I think he's also he's got a very fantasy friendly game. He doesn't necessarily have to play great to put up big fantasy numbers. And I think that because of controlling that offense the way that he will, I think that he's going to be involved in a lot of the scoring.
Yeah, I can get behind that. All right, who's the guy that makes the leap? Like, is there a Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position this year that, I loved him last year coming into the season and got him in like the 12th round or whatever it was, and, turned out to be QB1. It was all said and done. Is there any guy that we think kind of falls into that bucket this year? And maybe it's not quite as off the radar as I think he was last season, but thoughts on a guy who can maybe be a lot better than people are expecting?
I don't have anyone in mind that I think is going to make a leap to that degree, but I do think Kyler Murray is probably the one that has the most potential to do something like that, because he has the similar rushing upside. I mean, he has rushing upside. He doesn't have quite Lamar's rushing upside, but getting the number one receiver in DeAndre Hopkins is massive. Kenyon Drake is an excellent fit for that scheme. So I think that the team is going to move the ball really, really well. And I think they're going to be able to cap off drives with touchdowns a lot more efficiently than they had been last season when they didn't have that number one receiver and they only had Drake for half the year. So I really see that as a potentially high-powered offense that could have Kyler as an actual MVP candidate. I mean, if you just get that team to 11-5 or something like that, which I do think is in their range of outcomes, then all of a sudden, he might be talked about on that level of Lamar Jackson last year. I mean, he probably won't have the same raw numbers, but, impact-wise, I think that he has a chance to make a very big leap in terms of fantasy. And I think that especially with respect to his ADP, it should be something that has a high ceiling.
Yeah, I think Arizona is a team that takes a step for a lot of reasons. I mean, Kingsbury even kind of came out and said, like, he got too cute early on. If you looked at that offense as the year went on, it got better because it's a huge adjustment going from calling plays at Texas Tech to calling plays in the NFL. And,
right,
that's an adjustment that's going to take, more than a couple of weeks to do. And I think as the year went on, that team got a little bit better. And when you bring in a Hopkins, but on the flip side, you didn't really lose anything. Like normally when you trade for a player like that, you're giving something up. They gave away what looked to be a washed up David Johnson. Looked like Jerome Bettis running out there last year. And it's funny, you mentioned Drake. And I'm lukewarm on Drake. Like he could be all right, but I'm
high on him.
But the thing we shouldn't forget is Chase Edmonds is still there, and he is a great backup for that system. Remember when he played last year? He didn't play a lot because he ended up getting hurt. But in those games that he did play, he was very, very effective. And they still have Christian Kirk. They still have the ageless wonder and Larry Fitzgerald. They drafted like 4 receivers last season. I'm with you. I think this offense takes a major step, not just because Murray gets more experience, but I think because the coaching staff knows what to expect a little bit more. And you can't underrate that. I mean, when you got Kingsbury going against a guy like Andy Reid, who's been in the league for 20 some odd years, I mean, it's a mismatch that you really can't account for. And yeah, year 2 is still not year 22, but it's going to be a lot better than year 1. So I love that call on that Arizona offense.
Nice. Yeah. I think that they've got a lot of potential. I think that in their division, they do have some solid defenses to contend with, especially with the Seahawks now getting Jamal Adams.
Yeah, good point.
But their schedule outside of their division is potentially very weak.
Which is a sneaky thing to look at when you're kind of building these best ball lineups too. Where do you fall on like quarterbacks and tight ends? Because this is the proverbial question. I think the chalk says you draft 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends. Do you subscribe to that, or do you think there's a case to be drafting more at that position? Because again, it's just taking your best players at each particular position. You got to draft, you got to have only 1 quarterback, but you're going to have, 2 running backs and a flex. So therefore, typically it makes more sense to obviously draft more of those positions when you include buys. But where do you fall on that? Because I think it's an interesting talking point.
Yeah, well, I think it typically depends on the quality of your highest skill player at that position. So, if you have someone like Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, anyone who's one of the top performers at their position, you probably only need 1 backup. If at the same time, I could still see taking a 3rd just because if you're not doing many leagues, and you want to make sure your team has a chance if someone's injured, then, I can understand it. And, there's also something to be said for just taking the good quarterbacks from other players, because there are certain positions you can get late, in particular wide receivers with upside. But as far as tight end, I'm probably more likely to go with 3 unless I have like a Kelsey or Kittle type of player. But typically I might be going away from those players unless they kind of fall further than I expect them to. And I like the idea of taking a few tight ends that I think have upside.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you too. Like I have had, I think I've a dozen teams maybe, and I think I got 1 Kelsey and no Kittle to this point. And tight end is dropping like a rock. Like even Zach Ertz is a guy who's not being drafted particularly high. And, a guy like Mark Andrews, I feel, is just going to have a ridiculous amount of touchdown regression this year. I mean, he scored so many touchdowns last year, and I just don't know if it's going to be sustainable, back-to-back seasons. Right. And he's not.
They threw 36. That was just a ridiculous amount for them to throw.
Yeah.
But yeah, and you know what? Something to watch out for with Andrews when drafting early. He does have a pre-existing condition. He's one of the few players that could be considering opting out. I don't know if he is at all, but
okay.
He has some sort of pre-existing condition that might make him a little more at risk than other players. So I'd be a little bit careful on him early on before I know that he's playing for sure. But at his price, I'm probably just not likely to get him anyway.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. A couple of tight ends I am looking at. I think Jonnu Smith is interesting because he is the clear number 1 tight end on that team. With no Delaney Walker. And I know Walker was out most of the season, but he really stepped up late in the season, kind of similar to how we saw Andrews do at the end of last season as well, or 2 seasons ago, and then broke out. I think Smith is a guy when you look at the pedigree, you look at the build of this guy, he just hasn't had opportunity. And you're getting him pretty late in most drafts. And and the one thing I love to do, and stacking I think is important with this format. You need to, obviously you want to win your league, but when you get to the second round, if you finish top 2, you move on. You have to win that week. And to win a week, you're basically playing a GPP. Right. And what do we do when we play GPPs? We stack. So I think if you're not stacking your quarterback, then you're not doing it right. And you can get a Tannehill, Jonnu Smith stack for like literally next to nothing. Tannehill is not being drafted very high. And that's really one of the things that I think is important that I hope people get out of this who are drafting these things is to work that stack. And if you can get, quarterbacks later, whether it's even a Darnold and a Herndon or a Jonnu and a Tannehill, I mean, they're not great guys, but if you're drafting 2 or 3 quarterbacks because you're going that route, stack them all up, and it just takes one big week for you to necessarily advance.
Yeah, and I like Jonnu in particular I like him as a part of a 3 tight end committee, or if you have a high-level tight end ahead of him, because he's going to likely have a few spike weeks. So he works for best ball because he's got a little more breakaway ability than a lot of other tight ends do. And so he is likely to have some of those weeks that kind of win you the week. And if those come at the right time, then he could be someone who isn't on a whole lot of other rosters who are competing with you in the playoff scenario. And so, yeah, it's one of those ways that you can kind of get ahead of a field that is already going to be pretty sharp.
Yeah. And again, it's like injuries, you don't think about it so much when you're drafting now, but look back last season. And I wish we still could look at our draft app and look at some of the squads that we had out there. Injuries are the real deal. I mean, they are just so prevalent in football today with the physical nature of these things. I mean, even the quarterback position last year was as decimated as I've ever seen. And like you say, if you go 2 quarterbacks and one of them gets hurt, you're not drawing dead, but you're darn close to it unless the other guy just goes absolutely bonkers. And same with tight end. And that's where I don't know if I do 3 and 3, but and again, a lot of this is dictated on who you're drafting at certain spots, but
exactly,
I'm not afraid to go that route, and I don't think you're doing it wrong. Okay, a couple of guys I need to get to. What do you think of Gronk after a year off? I mean, this guy was, tight end 1 seemed for like the past 5-6 years before kind of a rough season before he decided to retire. He goes to Tampa, a ton of weapons, way more than they probably had in Tampa. But I think a year off can do a guy good, especially a guy who's only like 31, 32 years old. It's not like this guy is that long in the tooth. Any chance we see Gronk hit 9, 10 touchdowns this year?
I think if he were to hit an amount like that, he still wouldn't have a ton of actual yards. I think that it's possible. I think it's within the range of outcomes. I think he's probably more likely to have around 6. And, I think he'll get a decent amount of yards for a tight end, but I'm not really that in on Gronk this year because there's, you look at Tampa Bay from last year, and one of the reasons that they put up such big numbers is they had Jameis chucking it, throwing interceptions, having to bring the team back from his own failures, and so he's just racking up the counting stats. Whereas with Tom Brady, he's going to be a little bit more efficient, and they're going to jump out to leads more, and they're going to have games where they just grind it out with the run game at the end because they have a big lead, and that's something that was not happening in Tampa Bay last year. And not only that, but, you had Godwin and Evans last year without a real major number 3 until Perriman kind of filled in for Godwin. But now you've got another third receiver, I think Tyler Johnson coming in as a rookie, who I think could be a decent number 3, at least a guy who takes some targets away from the other players on the team. And you've got Gronk, and you've got some running backs who can do a little bit more in the passing game. Yeah, you've got O.J. Howard. You've still even got Cameron Brate. So, I mean, you've got a lot of mouths to feed there. And while I think that the top players are still going to get theirs just isn't going to be as much as it was last year.
And Tampa's defense wasn't garbage. Like they
improved. Yeah, they're on their way up. So, this team is going to blow some other teams out and then grind it out with the run game sometimes.
I don't think that's a bad call. All right, we're running long here. We'll do this again because this is too good. But give me a guy that you are not high on that you think other people are.
Okay, let's see. Man, that's a tough one.
Okay, I'll throw a name out there. Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Okay, him. I'm lukewarm on him. I'm not low on him or anything, but I don't like the idea of spending an early round draft pick on him, like really early. I kind of feel like you got to get a deal on him to really make it work, just because I don't know how involved Damian Williams is going to be, and I kind of don't like to pick with that type of uncertainty. I like players that I know I can project volume to. Now, getting pieces of the Kansas City offense, I'm not going to fault you for that at all. I really like Mecole Hardman. He's someone I'm high on for that offense, especially for best ball. He's perfect for best ball. Even Sammy Watkins for best ball makes sense. He's going to have some spike weeks likely. And
Hardman, let me just follow up on that for a minute. If you watched the Chiefs last year, that dude just blew by a number. Like there were plenty of routes that he ran that he just had the guy beat and either didn't make the catch or the pass wasn't there. Like the receiver position is hard to break out year one. We saw a few guys do it last year, but it's hard. This guy in that offense, especially when like Watkins feels semi-washed, I'm with you, man. Like that's a guy I think has major breakout ability. I love that.
Yeah. Someone else that I like to break out quite a bit, even though we already did last year, is DJ Moore. I really like the fit with Teddy Bridgewater there. And honestly, people think they're going to be like the worst team in the league, and I just don't see it that way. I think that when you replace a number 3 receiver that was Jarius Wright with Robbie Anderson, and then you replace Kyle Allen, who was horrible, with Teddy Bridgewater, you've got big upgrades on the offense. And I think that having downgrades on defense like they did is just going to lead to potential shootouts and potential high volume passing and, still all those targets for McCaffrey, still all those targets for DJ Moore. I think that the Carolina offense has a lot of upside, actually.
Yeah, I think they're in a spot where they could be playing some catch up, and that's not a bad thing for fantasy sports. It's kind of like looking at the numbers that Minshew, and there's another guy to kind of talk about. And by the way, Laviska Shenault, I really really love, because I think
for free, right?
He's for free, and he's a guy that what's the one thing Fournette couldn't freaking do last year? He couldn't score touchdowns to save his life. And if you go back to Shenault when he was at Colorado, they ran a ton of gimmicky plays with him, either taking the ball wildcat or running him in motion and running and giving him a short pass. Like they realize like this is a big, strong, athletic dude, and if he stays healthy, I think he can actually be a guy that runs in a touchdown or two for you. Because, again, wide receivers, rookies, and especially this year with no preseason games, I think, I never really love rookies that often. Running backs, I think you can get away with a little bit. But even then, it's like pass protection's a big freaking deal these days. And, going back to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like, do you really want to put a rookie in there, or do you want to put in a guy who – basically helped you win the freaking Super Bowl the year before, who the only reason he didn't play was because he got hurt? Like, if he's healthy, did Damian Williams not play well enough to keep his job last year? I don't think so. Like, is he the long-term answer 3-4 years down the road? Probably not. But I don't know that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, coming in as a rookie with no preseason games is going to step in anywhere the first 5-6 weeks and be a particularly big impact. And that's why I brought him up, is because I just think he's being overdrafted in best ball.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And to your point about Chenault, I mean, I feel like there's a scenario where if everything just lined up perfectly, he could be the best receiver in the draft for his rookie season if everything just clicked for him. Because, you know, I mean, he's getting like actual Saquon Barkley is a comp of his from PFF. And, I mean, he's that dynamic with the ball. You know, he's just the type of player that if they just find like, hey, we need to get this guy the ball no matter how we can do it, and they just decide they're really going to, that I think he could be a major breakout player. And I like rookie wide receivers really late because they can spike a few big weeks if you can get a guy who maybe ends up unexpectedly in a high volume role. Mm-hmm. But I don't like drafting rookie receivers early at all.
Yeah, and I don't know. And you know, Hollywood was the guy last year that people drafted, and you know, didn't really pan out. I mean, McLaurin had a great season, and I think I think he's an interesting prospect this year. And nobody
was drafting McLaurin in fantasy drafts early, so
no.
I mean, he's a perfect example of you get this guy for free, and he could win you some things.
It was N'Keal Harry was the guy people were drafting early. And what did he end up doing? Nothing. Caught 10 passes last year. He was terrible. And, you know, you look at a guy like Judy, a high draft pick. You look at a guy like Ruggs. You know, these guys are walking into systems where there's, especially Denver. I mean, Oakland's drafted a ton of wide receivers, but it's no sure thing that, they're walking into situations where they're going to be high volumes guys. Like Ruggs, that doesn't even fit his profile. In Judy, you got Cortland Sutton there. You still have Noah Fant there. They drafted KJ Hamler, who was a stud at Penn State. So it's not like a stone cold lock that this guy's going to step in and be the guy right off the bat. I mean, I think that's a great point to bring up about kind of these rookie wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, I like both of them so much, but when you look at production in the rookie season for wide receivers, it's usually nowhere near their prime. You know, you have a few exceptions, like A.J. Brown last year is a major exception to that. You got Amari Cooper is an exception, but even Calvin Johnson.
Nobody drafted Brown. He wasn't a guy
that
people were picking.
Those are the type of players that if you can get them really, really cheap, then it's huge. But you just don't waste an early pick on him. And, I mean, as much as I like Ruggs and Judy for their potential for a few spike games, I just don't think that the price is usually going to be worth it unless they just fall really far.
All right, we got to get out of here, but it's been incredible talking football. And be sure to subscribe to this RotoGrinders daily fantasy football feed. We'll be doing some more of these shows during this kind of ramp up to the NFL season, which we obviously hope takes place. He is Scott Hanson, Escot4. Scott, thanks so much for jumping on, man. This was tremendous, and I'll let you get through those last 8 teams that you need to grind, and then we'll do it again.
Thanks a lot. It was good talking to you.
Absolutely. And thanks you guys for listening to us and obviously being a part of what we do here at RotoGrinders.com. Football season right on the horizon. If you're grinding the daily fantasy NBA and the MLB, and you're not a subscriber already, please check us out. I'm telling you, we've been doing this longer than anybody. We were the content site of the year for all of fantasy sports. That includes the ESPN, the Roto World. FSGA gave us that honor, and something we're super proud of. And I hope you guys give us a try. And when football season runs around, we've got everything you need, we think, to be a successful player. But for Scott Hanson, I'm Dan Bach. Thanks again for checking us out. We'll talk to you again soon here on RotoGrinders.com.